fucking shit, man. Oh, we'll change the radio. It's getting dark. With a little bit eating bowl. Get the dirt on lead and boo. Give me all your and all them hugs and kisses too. Go ahead and start me a little timer right here on that little microphone tip. Welcome back to Rob's Arcade, where the games get played, the games get saved, so they can get played on another day, man. Thank you for tubing in, hanging out with me. I'd like to take a second, since you guys are hanging out here, to go ahead and hit that like button, hit that share, hit that subscribe. Go ahead and leave me a comment down below. I take the time to hang out here with you guys. The least you can do is take some time, show a little support. Perhaps you know somebody who might be into something like this. Even if it's a comment about how much you hate this video, every little bit can help here. We are back in a little segment I like to call comic book confessions. Kind of based off of a older HBO television original called Taxi Cab Confessions. And it was basically a show, I believe it took place in New York, and they would have a cab set up with little lipstick-sized cameras, and it would drive around, pick people up, and they would share, their crazy stories, and HBO would get them to sign off so they could air whatever craziness they were talking about in their cab ride. And it was a really cool show. It was really wild, a little dark from time to time. You would get some really crazy stories in there, but it was just a really neat idea for a show, and I'm kind of stealing a little bit of that here with this idea of being able to drive around in a taxi here in Los Santos and just picking people up and sharing stories of my comic book collecting, just different things over the years. Last time I shared a story with you guys about my origin into Marvel Comics, and I would love to take a moment and share with you guys my origin into DC Comics as well, because it's a little bit different and actually a little bit fitting. It's around this time of year back in I believe it was like 92. I was hanging out with some friends over the weekend in the beginning of, I believe it was February, when my stomach started bothering me, and lo and behold, it turned out to be something more severe than just a flu or a stomach ache. It actually turned out to be an appendicitis, and wasn't quite even really sure what was going on, to the point where it actually hospitalized me. Spent most of the entire month of February out of school, half of it in the hospital, the other half at home, and it was a pretty severe and taxing time for me. literally one of those moments where if my father hadn't intervened when he did and called the paramedics, we might not be hearing me do these videos at all. Um, but I spent, like I said, about 2 weeks in the hospital, and at this point, I was already very much into superhero comics. This was about, like I said, 1992, I believe we were looking at. And at this point, I had kind of made the transition from, uh, the monster comics, and had gotten into the Marvel, the superheroes, the bright colors, the capes, and all of that. Is this a red light? Um, but I wasn't really much into Marvel at this point. I was still very much into, excuse me, I wasn't very much into DC at this point. I was pretty much a Marvel, like I never really considered myself like a Marvel or a DC person because I love it all. Dark Horse, Image Comics. But definitely in the beginning of my comic book collecting career, if you will, I was very much just Marvel, Hulk, Punisher, Spider-Man. It was pretty much, um, all the characters that Stan Lee had created, and I was aware. Like I liked Batman. At this point, I'd seen the Tim Burton film, and that really struck a chord with me.
Thanks.
I was familiar, with Superman, most of the Justice League, but I wasn't doing a lot of collecting when it came to DC Comics until I found myself in the hospital, like I said, recuperating from just appendicitis, and I had family and friends coming to visit me while I was in the hospital for a few weeks, and they would bring me things to do. I got like a giant, like almost like a poster size coloring sheet to work on, and they would bring me comics and just different things to kind of keep me entertained. And one of the things that I received while I was in the hospital from one of my uncles was a couple of comics, two of which being Batman comic books. One just a standard Batman issue. It was a comic featuring the ventriloquist and some common thugs, which is basically what I knew of the DC. You have got to be kidding me. I'm gonna like chalk that up to the snow. But it's like typical Batman comic books, some kind of gimmicky supervillain with some thug goon, like bad guys. Nothing too really sophisticated or complex as far as storytelling. Basically, like you might find in like a 1966 Batman episode, where again you got just a bad guy with a gimmick and a few thugs that surround him, and that's just kind of the common Batman comic or Superman comic that I was used to coming across. Um, so you had the issue with the ventriloquist, and then there was an issue. It was more of a mini series run, part of something I believe it was called like Gotham Knights, a 4 issue miniseries, and in it there were themes and topics that I hadn't really seen delivered in a superhero comic book. Now I was used to reading monster comics and horror comics that would deal with like mystery and murder and different like sensual and lustful relationships and things of that nature. So like adult themes in comics weren't new to me. The Punisher could be pretty graphic from time to time, but finding these things that they were almost seemed like they might exist in like an episode of like maybe Melrose Place or 30 something, like some adult television sitcom, and I found them resting in the pages of a Batman comic where they were talking about like things like sexuality, um, like serious drug use to where Batman was pulling some drug user off the ledge of a building, keeping him from jumping to his death because he was just so whacked out of his spine. There was talk of things like AIDS and HIV, and just all of these adult relationships and situations, and just again things you might find on like some adult drama, NYPD Blue or something like that. And I remember laying in the hospital reading that comic and thinking like this is different. This is new. This is very very unique. Something I wasn't quite used to seeing. And like typically, it was again some villain. Maybe they've got a hold of a death ray or a weather machine, or they're just bent on ruling the world. Is that the snowman jingling? That's pretty cool. I feel like that's I feel like that's a pretty new feature, having the snowman actually jingle jangle. But yeah, that really opened my eyes to what a comic book could really be. Again, up until that point, your Spider-Man, your X-Men was all about mutants and gamma rays and radiation and very science fiction-y. Just almost, I hate to use the word comic booky, but very comic booky tropes and ideas. Again, some magical ring or like I said, that's just certain cosmic waves or a weather machine that's wreaking havoc on New York. And then all of a sudden, I find myself reading these comics, and it's like, wow, this is very real, And that's when I started to really fall in love with not only DC Comics but Batman specifically. Like I stated before, Batman, the 1989 Tim Burton film, really hit a certain spot in my heart when I was younger, growing up. That movie came out just at the right time for me and allowed me to discover that character in a very realistic manner. I think in a manner that the character was meant to be discovered and meant to be seen. And up until that point, my only real exposure to Batman had again been that Batman 1966. What are you doing way out here, bro? It was a 1966 Batman.
I have a customer for you right now.
And so to get a 19 '89 Tim Burton film. Um, at that early, almost pre-teen age, really just hit just. I don't see him. There we go. Really hit just right, and the comics that I had read up until that point weren't that dark and that gritty and that realistic. And not to say that they weren't out there. Like this wasn't like, oh, this was the first time Batman was being portrayed in this gritty, realistic light. Like there were so many books out there at that time that really shed a light on um, what it would be like to be a superhero without superpowers, and try to make it as grounded as possible. And I guess that's what really did it for me. You know, it was there was no radioactive spider bite. There was no gamma rays blowing up in your face. It was literally just some guy trying to figure it out and trying to be the best superhero that he could be. And it wasn't just dealing with laughing gas and giant exploding penguins. You know, there was also like these drug issues and grown up relationships and things that just it made it very real, um, which I don't know that everybody wants that much realism in their comics all the time, but I think it does make it uh, a bit fun to where you have
I'm not a
you know
tourist, so no long routes, yes?
I don't know, something like the X-Men. And there are realistic situations in the X-Men, like relationships and um, things like school and class, and you'll find them even going out to the grocery store and trying to pay bills and just very adult and, realistic human things that everyday people do. But for the most part, like I said, it's some crazy guy with like a metal arm and a glowing eye will show up, and you know um, Magneto's got some crazy electromagnetic device that he's used to tap into all the radios across the East Coast, and has all the non-mutant people under hypnotic mind. It's like, what? This is like some crazy wild story. You're just like, this is this is a cool story, but it's never going to happen. And then you get into the pages of some of these Batman comics, and it's like, wow, yeah, no, this is, very realistic. This could very much happen. And I think that's what, I like Punisher a lot for that same reason. Punisher would do stories where he would be like undercover doing drug op to drug ring operations in like high school, and infiltrating like mafia casinos and just underground card games, and these like plots and stories you might see in a 1980s 1990s Steven Seagal action movie. So that was just really fun, getting those types of stories in the colorful pages of a comic. But that was the very first time I really fell in love with like a DC comic book. It just happened to be Batman. I think Batman, Nightwing to this day, probably my two favorite characters out of the DC universe. But again, I think it started with that idea that, like, wow, Batman moves and operates, yes, very much in a superhero universe,
Thanks.
but he also moves and operates very much in a realistic and
This is
grounded
dispatch. I got a job going right now.
universe. And again, like I said, I think you could argue like, well, so does Spider-Man. So does a lot of characters that exist in comics. Spider-Man's constantly, you know, trying to um, figure out how to juggle a job and, you know, a sick aunt, and trying to stop the, scorpion from striking again. So, there's some very relatable stories and plot pieces within these, like, science fiction-y tales with these very extreme and off the wall rogues. Spider-Man is a pretty wild rogue gallery. Um, like I said, then he's like, stories where he's like trying to pay rent and all of that. But for some reason, I don't know what it was. Like Batman, even though it's some guy dressed up in a giant bat costume, um, the universe, the stories, all of it just seemed very, very grounded. Like it could happen, Like you could see somebody just snapping, whether it's their parents being murdered in front of them, or maybe like a Michael Douglas falling down situation where somebody finally just, enough is enough. They finally snap, they finally lose it. Maybe it's not a giant bat that you're dressed up in. Maybe it's just a leather jacket,
Hello.
like a black ski mask, stocking cap thing, kind of
Okay,
like
let's go.
what's his name? Death Wish dude. But that was it. It was like me laying in the hospital, and my uncle picking me up a couple of comics to just give me something to do. I still have those issues, those exact issues, the very same issues, the one with the ventriloquist and the issue of the miniseries. Back then, I wasn't going to, like, comic shops, or really like picking up um, like miniseries. Like the only thing I was really collecting on an ongoing basis were comics like Wolverine, Spider-Man, Punisher, stuff like that were available on my local grocer's comic book rack. Um, but if something like, a four-part miniseries was out, um, it wasn't to say it was available, everywhere. It could have been something that was just happened to be on a rack at the gift shop at the hospital. And so unless I found myself back in there come March or April or whatever, there's a good chance I might not have even seen the rest of that miniseries, Or I don't even know if I know, or I knew at that time what a like a four-part miniseries was even all about. Like I've understood, like, what the concept was. I was coming back to life after, like I said, my appendix exploding in my body. So there's a good chance I wasn't really aware of what I was even necessarily reading. But I do remember, like I said, picking up that comic and flipping through, and it was like, oh wow, like he's not fighting the Joker or some colorful villain. He's literally saving some like hippie punk from jumping off the side of a building, and there was like these don't know, like this B story with like these lawyers or these like business people, and uh, this girl thought this guy was gay, and then there was talk about HIV and AIDS, and I was just like, wow, man, this is some cool
Thank you.
stuff.
Thank you so much.
It sounds weird, you know. It sounds so ridiculous being 12 years old and going like, oh man, this like Melrose Place
I've got
stuff is
someone for you.
cool. But like I said, I think it was just something new, something different that I wasn't used um, to seeing in in my comics. So anyway, very long-winded tale of how I got into DC Comics. It's all different, you know. My journey from monster and horror comics to the superheroes, from whether it's Marvel and DC or even the birth of Image. Um, each each little piece has its own confession and its own little story. So, thank you so much, guys, for hanging out here on Comic Book Confessions. It's been cool driving around here in the snow in this winter wonderland, and like I said, very very interesting. Like I said, about the same time of year that this happened, um, back, you know, in the 90s. If we can do the math real quick, that was like, um, let's see. Well, actually, it would be 34 years ago. Um, so very cool. Yeah, about this time, about 34 years ago, I was getting into DC DC Comics. Pretty pretty cool stuff. Anyway, guys, thanks for hanging out here with me. Tune in next time when we will take a look at another cool piece of my comic book history, my collecting career, if you will. I don't know if you can really call it a career. It's not really like a job that I do or something like that, but it feels like a career. It feels like it's been something I've done for quite some time. Anyway, guys, I've been talking long enough. Thank you so much for hanging out. Make sure, like I said, you like, share, subscribe, leave a comment down below. Most importantly, take care of yourself, take care of each other, and until next time, don't spend that quarter anywhere else. See you later, guys. Bye-bye.